I'm Cornell Clayton, Director of the Foley Institute. On behalf of the Institute, I'll welcome you to our event, one of our ongoing in the series on the 2024 election. Before I introduce our speaker today, let me remind you, next week, same time, same place, we have Jim Curry from the University of Utah who'll be talking about Congress and the impact of the upcoming election on congressional control. We're fortunate to have us today, however, Lou Jacobson. Since 2009, Lou has served as the chief correspondent for PolitiFact. And for those of you who don't know about PolitiFact, it's probably the largest, most reliable fact-checking organization in the country. It's owned by the Poynter Institute, and so lots of people rely on it. Before that, Lou worked as the deputy editor of Roll Call magazine and was the founding editor of its legislative wire service, Congress Now. Earlier, Lou spent more than a decade covering politics, policy, and Congress for the National Journal. And he is the co-author of the upcoming 2026 edition of the Almanac of American Politics and was a senior author for many of its previous editions. Since 2004, Lou has written a column on politics in the states, which runs in Roll Call, or has run in Roll Call, Governing, and the Cook Political Report, and currently runs in Sabado's Crystal Ball. Sabado's Crystal Ball comes out of the University of Virginia, and U.S. News and World Report. Early in his career, Lou wrote about science for The Economist, The Wall Street Journal, and The Washington Post and Science magazines. He received the Wiedenbaum Center Award for Evidence-Based Journalism from Washington University in St. Louis 3 times, and he received the Best Business Award for economic coverage from the Society of American Business Editors and Writers. Lou also teaches. He's currently at West Virginia University's Reed College of Media and has been a visiting scholar at St. Bonaventure University School of Communication since 2020. Join me now in welcoming Lou Jacobson to the podium.
So my specialty has always been to focus on state-based politics because I'm a native Washingtonian. I worked most of my career in Washington, and there have been, and the pattern for like a lot of journalists in DC is to focus on DC and not necessarily get out of the states. And I have I've had the goal of following a story from every state. I was able to follow from all the lower 48 states between 96 and 2002. Took me another 20 years to get state number 49, which was Hawaii, and I still need Alaska. But I love covering politics. I'm doing a story during the time that I'm here for U.S. News. Getting a chance to talk to a lot of political experts here in the state. A lot of what I write about is some of the lesser known, I guess lesser attention races. So, I do write, of course, about the presidential race. I do write about Senate, House, but I also focus really heavily on the governors, state attorney generals, secretaries of state elections, lieutenant governors, state legislatures, ballot initiatives. So I'll be talking about all of those a little bit today. When they asked me to come here, I kind of found it as a good opportunity to filter everything that I'd learned in the 2024 election cycle. Sort of take a step back and see what the kind of common threads are. And so I put together about a half dozen of those threads that I'll go through and show you some graphics for as well. The first thing that I think is noticeable is just how few seats are competitive. So I'm going to read off all those levels. 95 out of 538 electoral votes in the presidential race are competitive. That's 17.7%. In the Senate, there are 33 seats up this year. 7 of them are seriously competitive. That's 21%. Of the 435 House seats, 47 are competitive. That's 10.8%. Thanks to the implosion in North Carolina that you guys may have seen recently, the Republican candidate. It used to be 2 out of the 11 governors' races this year were competitive. Now it's only 1, so that's 9%. Of the separately elected lieutenant governor races, there are 5 of those. 1 is genuinely competitive, 20%. Of the state AGs, There are 10 races this year. 2 of them are competitive, 20%. You're sensing a pattern here. Secretary of State races, there are 7. 1 is competitive, 14%. Of the 98 partisan state legislative chambers, 12 I have currently as competitive, and that would be about 12%. And then you just see this pattern where things are very fixed. Almost no state has one party control one chamber of the legislature and the other party controls the other, which it used to be pretty common that was the case. And then you guys might be familiar with the term trifecta, which is where both legislative chambers and the governor are the same party. That is true in 82% of states. That's a trifecta. Only 18% of states, or 9 states, have some degree of split between the governor and the state legislative chambers. And really, in most states, if you look at all the statewide elected offices, things like state AG, secretaries of state, state auditors, superintendent of public education, whatever they call it in a particular state. I don't have the numbers on me because I last checked it about two years ago. But at that point, they were virtually all states had either 100% in the hands of one party of all of those offices, or maybe they had one of a different party, and I suspect that's even more so today. I think there are very few states, like one of the few actually is North Carolina, which is why it's so competitive in so many ways, where they have a kind of even split between the two-party control of those offices. So the bottom line is not a lot of competition. We can basically choose any level you want, and you can say with pretty good confidence that either party, one party or the other, is going to win 80% of the time in those seats. Second point, we are pretty evenly divided. Here is the let's see, this is the 2020 presidential race. 51% for the Democrats. This is popular vote. 51% for the Democrats, 49% for the GOP. Senate currently 51% Democratic, 49% Republican. House 51% Republican, 49% Democrat. The governors are a little bit wider. 54%. Actually, sorry, that should be flipped. It's 54% GOP, 46% Democratic. But even so, basically you're talking about 27 to 23. So the change in partisanship of just a single seat would bring that in the range of the other ones. So we are a very evenly divided nation by parties, and it seems like in a lot of cases even that there are sort of internal shifts which sort of preserve that degree of balance. I'm thinking of Wisconsin here, where there are certain areas of Wisconsin where blue collar, white, historically Democratic leaning places are becoming more red in the Trump era, but once solidly conservative Republican areas in the suburbs are becoming more blue, and those two things are basically sort of cancel each other out, and so you still have a very close state in terms of breakdown compared to what you had a very similar situation 10 or 20 years ago. Here's a graphic that we put together by U.S. News story about the House. So the dark blue and the dark red seats are safe or likely for either the blue or the red parties, and the only seats that are in contention in a serious way are the ones that are some other color. So the darker blue going to the lighter blue are to one degree or another competitive. The purple ones are pure toss-ups, and the ones that are slightly red are slightly leaning to the GOP, but are competitive. And so you can see what a narrow slice of the chamber it is. We know, 90% of the seats, how they're going to fall out. And, if one party has a good night, it can totally flip to one side or the other, but it's going to be pretty close, most likely. You're not going to see a large change in partisan control these days. It could surprise us. There could be some dramatic thing that happens. I'm not seeing it right now, but who knows? But the way things look now, it's likely going to be shifted a few seats in one direction or another in the House. 3 is how little change there has been within this within this presidential cycle, and also even to a large extent for the Senate and the House and the governor's races too. Really, I do handicapping of all of those for a combination of U.S. News and Simon Hood's Crystal Ball, and the setup is 7 different rating categories. We have likely. Safe GOP, likely GOP, lean GOP, toss-up, lean Democratic, likely Democratic, safe Democratic. And I will update those every couple of months. Other competitors who do the same thing do it a little bit more frequently than I do. But I've been doing this for years, but in terms of just the 2024 cycle that we're currently in, I started probably in the first quarter of 2023 and have done 3 or 4 different iterations of this, and very few seats are changing hands. Are shifting from one category to another. So if you look at the presidential as a good example, I've shifted things around a little bit, but they've mostly been to make them safer, towards the safer end of it. There's only a single state, unless I'm forgetting something, it's only a single state that I've shifted from a less competitive to a more competitive category this entire time, and that was North Carolina, which had been lean GOP, and I now have as a toss-up, as do a lot of other folks who do this. That's the only one that has become more competitive, and that was after Kamala Harris took over for Joe Biden, and she's just a better positioned candidate to win there. But you see very, very few changes. It's still pretty much the same 7 battleground states that it was, in early 2023 or frankly in early 2021. You've got North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And that's like who I had in my competitive states almost 2 years ago, and they're still pretty much the same group. Something else that I've been tracking for a while is there are 3 significant, and you could probably add some, but I think these 3 speak pretty loudly. 3 key demographic factors that will tell you a lot about how a place votes. So that would be the education level, with a higher education level being on the Democratic side, and a lower education level on the Republican side. Race, so the whiter a place is, the more Republican it is. Typically, the more minority voters there are, the more Democratic it tends to be. And how urban a place is. Urban places have become ever more blue. Rural places have become ever more red. So what I did is just a very simple calculation. It's not complicated at all. I rank ordered all 50 states on these 3 variables, and then I did an average of their rating for each of those 3, and then I rank ordered them with the GOP leaning variables towards the top of the list, and the Democratic leaning variables on the bottom of the list. And if you draw a line straight through to, like between 25 and 26 on your way to 50, you'll see that not all, but virtually all of the states above that 25 line are red, as you would expect, and then most of the states that are below that line are blue. And this is just like three simple variables, and it tells you a lot about about the voting patterns. So there are some exceptions, and by the way, only 5 out of the 25 states in each of those categories broke ranks. So there again is the 20% figure that I was showing before, that are competitive or different in some way. So the ones that are unusual: Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, are 3 New England states, which are quite white and are actually pretty rural, but they have high education, and that's been the driving factor. New England has had some sort of unique politics in the recent decades, and then Wisconsin is also up there as well, a fairly white state that has been still competitive for Democrats. And then some of the states that are at the bottom, which should be blue, but when I voted red: Florida and Texas. Florida has become increasingly Republican, although not sort of dominantly so necessarily. Texas has been dominantly Republican, but is becoming less so. And so those are states that are that do have a high percentage of non-white voters. But in Florida, for instance, Cuban voters are quite solidly Republican. And in Texas, it's becoming closer, but the GOP has won, I believe, every statewide elected office since 1990, maybe. So it's just been tough for Democrats to sort of turn the corner there, although they've gotten closer. Let's see. No, sorry. Okay, so I'll stay here for a second. There comes a point when a party's weakness in a presidential, congressional, and gubernatorial context becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. As soon as a party's prospects seem grim in a particular state, it becomes hard to get a credible candidate to run for office or to run for higher office than they're already in, and it becomes hard to raise money to fund a decent party infrastructure. And the fewer talented and adequately funded candidates mustered by the minority party in a given state, the more potentially winnable seats that party has to basically cede to the more powerful, well-funded party. It becomes kind of a spiral of doom, a doom loop, where if you're consistently losing, no one wants to sort of join your team, no one wants to give any money, no one wants to volunteer, to door knock. And so in a lot of the states, we have the minority party has sort of become more extreme or less competent at winning elections, and most of the politics within the state is really sort of conducted within the majority party. Now, sometimes there are splits within that large majority party between more moderate and more conservative if it's red, or progressive if it's blue. But I've seen this phenomenon in states like Hawaii, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, where the Republicans are very hard to find these days, and then in red states like the Dakotas, Wyoming, and Idaho, where the Democrats, even if their issues might resonate, it's just hard to sort of get people to work for the party's benefit, to give money and volunteer their time, and it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. A good example that I just followed a story from a few weeks ago, Illinois. There you have about, historically, roughly a third of the population is in Chicago itself, a third of the population is in the Chicago suburbs, a third of the population is in the downstate area, which is everywhere else. 20 years ago, the GOP was quite competitive in the suburbs of Chicago. And in fact, for the lower offices had kind of a sort of strong GOP machine controlling those suburbs. But as the national winds have changed, particularly in the Trump era, the suburbs have gone increasingly Democratic, and that's been a lever that basically shifted the state of Illinois from being, at least competitive 20 years ago, on the national level and for like Senate seats and so forth and governor's races, and is now really solidly blue. And so you see the state party there for the GOP has become sort of increasingly a downstate party, very, very conservative, socially conservative, and are putting forth candidates who just have no chance of winning in that other 2/3. It's a little bit less dramatic here in Washington State. I've been doing some reporting over the past few days since I've been here, but I do get the sense that there's enough of a lean towards the Democrats in the state because of the population imbalance in Western Washington and Seattle area. This part of the state, of course, is very red typically. But the kinds of candidates that the state party is putting forward really don't have much appeal to the majority of voters in the western part of the state. And when they do put forward a candidate who has potential to reach across the aisle, it's very hard for them to balance that they need to keep their supporters within the party happy, especially in an era when Trump and Trumpian politics are so dominant within the GOP. Trying to balance that with a message that also reaches people who are, on the other side or in the middle. So it's a very difficult balancing act. One thing that is notable: structural challenges for Democrats. So there are a couple things here on this map. This is not definite; it's a projection. But as you may know, every 10 years the census comes out and they redraw boundaries within states, but also they rebalance the number of electoral votes per state. And the states that have, let's see the color coding here. Are you seeing Texas as being kind of blue?
No, it's red.
It's red. Oh, that's weird. Okay, it's shifting the colors for what the original was. But basically, here, I'll just explain it to you.
No, it's not red. Don't listen to me. Black?
It's definitely not the blue that I'm seeing on the computer here. Texas is going to gain 4 seats, which currently is a fairly Republican state. Florida is on track to gain 3 seats, again, a state which has gone increasingly Republican. Some of the other solidly GOP states, let's see, gaining 2 seats, either 1 or 2 seats. Actually, I think it's just 1. Tennessee, very solidly Republican. South Carolina, very solidly Republican. Utah, very solidly Republican. And Idaho, just next door, very solidly Republican. And then a couple battleground states, including Arizona and Georgia. So, on balance, these are states where just by winning the same states in 2032, I guess, the first time that they will use it after the census changes are made, if this holds, the GOP could win the same states they win today, but gain a bunch more electoral votes. And those are largely at the expense of states that are shrinking, which are and they tend to be blue. So you've got New York, California, poised to lose 2 or 3 seats each. I don't have it right in front of me. You've got Illinois, Minnesota, Michigan, Pennsylvania. A few battleground states there, but they have tended to lean Democratic. Oregon as well. Those are states, and then of course New York, I think I said. Those are states which are going to lose electoral votes, so even if the Democrats win them, they'll get fewer votes. So that's, now things could change, it's not the end of the decade yet, and also, as we've seen, states like Arizona and Georgia, 2 or 3 elections ago, no one ever would have said they would go Democratic, but they did in 2020, and so they are competitive now. So the situation can change, population trends could change, this is not a guarantee, but it's not a great outlook for the Democrats. It's a much better outlook for the Republicans. And then another thing the Democrats have to worry about is in the Senate. There's been an increasing pattern of Senate seats going to the party that has won the presidential race in that state. In recent years, the only split has been Maine, I believe, unless I'm forgetting something, where they voted for Susan Collins, a fairly moderate Republican, even as the state was voting for Joe Biden. And even though she had a credible opponent, well-funded opponent. So you're mainly seeing the Senate and the presidential races link up in terms of who they support. Now, why is this a problem for Democrats? Well, if you look at the way the Senate and the electoral votes are set up, right now there's a bit of a bias towards the GOP. There are more states, small population, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, where you get two senators, despite having a very small size of the population. So Democrats have a lot of so-called wasted votes in California. As far as the Senate goes, two people representing a huge state, two people representing a very large state in New York. Of course, the same is true in Texas and Florida for the Republicans. But on balance, what this means is that if you kind of allocate the seats in the Senate based on the strongly D or R states giving two of their senators to that party, and the purple states maybe sort of averaging one for each of them. The long-term kind of the long-term balance, I calculated it once, is the equilibrium is sort of 53 seats for the Republicans, 47 for the Democrats, given current partisan preferences. So that means that with 53 seats for the GOP, it's going to be super hard for the Democrats to ever get the majority again, until our voting patterns change. Which is one reason why Democrats probably want to keep the filibuster, because it's something that the minority can use to sort of block a fairly narrow majority in the Senate from doing things. Let's see. What to talk about? Okay, that's the end, but I have one more thing to talk about, and then we can take some questions. So if you like competition in politics, a little bit of a bright spot is actually ballot measures. Now, you might get sick of the TV commercials, which you're probably seeing a lot. There are 4 ballot measures on the ballot here, but it's and some people may disagree with this, but all 4 of the ballot measures on the ballot this time are conservative initiatives in a state which is very blue. I've seen in a lot of states where the majority of people, of voters, may have different policy preferences. Even as they're voting for one party, they may not agree on everything. So you're seeing this definitely in the abortion questions we're seeing. The pro-abortion rights side is 7 for 7 so far, and there's about, I think, 10 or so on the ballot this year, including some very red states. You saw Kansas, Kentucky, Montana, Ohio pass ballot measures. Even though those were solidly Republican states, Democrats are basically shut out of the formal power structure because they don't control the governorship or the legislature, except in Kansas they do the governorship. But Kentucky as well. But in terms of controlling legislature, it's very hard to get anything done unless you control the legislature and the governorship. And so, it seemed in each of those cases, voters, despite their strong GOP leanings, were able to sort of pursue a policy preference that they, liked by getting around the elected government. And the same is true in the opposite direction here. with these four ballot initiatives. We'll see how they do, and maybe they fail after all. But it does give the minority party, in this case the GOP, a chance to run on some issues which might be more popular than their own party brand is. So to me, that's sort of a bright spot. It's giving a little bit more competition in a time when so much is predetermined ahead of time by the sort of predominant voting patterns.
Okay.
So that's everything I have.
So we have about 25 minutes for some Q&A. Maybe I'll start us off. How much of this, the lack of competition, you think is the result of actual geographical polarization?
Yeah.
How much of it is a result of institutional factors like closed primaries, gerrymandering? And what I'm getting at is, can this be fixed by institutional reforms?
Yeah, I think it's probably all of the above. I think that there's been a lot of geographic self-sorting, people wanting to be in similar demographics to what they themselves are. And then that's a sort of self-reinforcing cycle where you never, like if you're in a blue area, you don't meet a lot of red voters and vice versa. So I think that is definitely part of it. Primaries are a huge issue, not so much in the state, but in a lot of places you have so many of those dark red and dark blue seats you saw on the chart of the House are because the sitting member has much more to fear from a primary challenge, somebody further to the right or further to the left, than they do from a general election opponent, which basically means that they're going to be more conservative or more liberal, as the case may be, and are going to be more uncompromising, because if they don't, then they're going to get primaried and they might lose. So it's, I would say, definitely a combination of the institutional factors and the sort of demographic sort of dynamics. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was a really interesting presentation. So I'm interested in what you ended up with in terms of the referendums on abortion. And we always talk about down ballot effects. I was curious to know about up ballot effects. And I guess this has to do with your definition of competition. Like a non-competitive. How do you? What is it? What are you using as an indicator for non-competitive states? And so that's a big issue because it's pretty bleak. But I'm not an American politics specialist. I work on. I'm a French politics specialist, and but I've been watching the elections. But I work on gender equality policy, and I've been watching what's happening with regards to people mobilizing around these referendums. And women, you didn't talk about gender at all. And so I'm wondering if you think that we're going to start talking about up ballot effects from these referendum, and are this going to break this competition, this no competition thing that you're talking about? So up ballot, but also, what is your definition of no competition states?
Okay, so just on that point,
I
would say
curious.
If it is pretty much any state in the presidential race that is not in that toss-up category, so that's 7 battleground states, and then 1 or 2 states kind of on either side of that are not truly competitive but are competitive-ish. I would say any other state beyond those would be pretty non-competitive these days. There is a lot of linkage between non-competitive in the presidential race and the Senate races and the governor's race. Now, governors are a little bit different because I think voters view the governor as the top person within their state, and state politics are a little different than national politics. Senate is going to be super aligned with your sort of presidential preference, your federal preference. State, there's a bit more flexibility. So there are governors, such as Kansas and Kentucky, where you have Democrats in a solidly red state, in part because maybe one of the candidates overreached in the dominant party, and they were a little bit too far to the right or the left, and so somebody from the opposite party was able to come in. But it's easier to do that. Well, actually, Vermont's a good example of that. There's a GOP governor, very, very moderate GOP governor of Vermont, very solidly blue state. And that's actually, I mean, his seat is basically safe GOP, which is crazy to think of in terms of Vermont, right? But he's, it's a small state, people know him, they trust him. Maybe on the margins, people, even Democrats might say, hey, he's kind of a good check on the Democratic legislature from going a little too far. So for state politics there, for the governorship, there's a little bit more flexibility and wiggle room for like one party who's not the dominant party to win. But certainly true for the federal races, statewide races. It's like president and Senate. And then, as I said, there is, except for a couple states, now a pretty strong certainty that all of the other elected statewide offices, like state AG, secretaries of state, state auditor, and so forth, tend to be from the same party, and that's going to be the same party as the presidential and the Senate, most likely. So that's sort of where I'm coming from. There's, with the exception of governors, it's pretty easy to determine if a state is solidly blue, solidly red,
But
or
for how
or
long?
purple.
I mean, the indicator, like, does that party have to be in office for a certain number of years? Like, how do you, like, from
I
one
don't have a
election to another?
specific definition.
That was my
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
What is the indicator for a
So-
state to be not, because does it have to be a certain number of years they hold office, or?
I would say the longer they are in office, the more comfortable you can feel about it. Georgia's a good example where where the Democrats won the presidential race in 2020 in Georgia. They won now 3 straight Senate elections. But I think all of the statewide elected officials, state AG, Secretary of State, and so forth, are all Republican, and the governor's Republican. And basically what happened in Georgia was you kind of had a dominant GOP for the past decade or so,
Right.
decade and a half, 2 decades, but some of the candidates who they nominated were too extreme, and so you had Democrats, especially in the Senate, suddenly competitive. What's that? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They're kind of exotic candidates, as Charlie likes to call them.
Thanks.
And so the Democrats got the opportunity, and now it's, it leans GOP for most of the down ballot races, but it's definitely competitive for the federal ones. So there is some like nuance to this, but I would consider Georgia now to be in that sort of battleground state, purple state kind of category. It's not one of those, and as of a few years ago, it would have been in the solidly Republican category, but it has moved over the past decade, and a lot of that has to do with the shift of suburban voters under Trump, in the Trump era, shifting more solidly towards the Democrats. I did a series of articles on the 15 key battleground states for the battleground counties for the 2024 presidential election. The one in Georgia that I had was Cobb County. So this is the place where Newt Gingrich, former House Speaker, he was a representative, 20, 25 years ago. Now it's comfortably Democratic. And that's a combination of suburban voters tending to go Democratic in the Trump era and increasing diversity. A lot of immigrants, a lot of people of color. It's a lot less white than it used to be. So that then tracks back to the charts I showed you before. So, okay, so your first question then was... sorry, tell me again what the question was.
Well, what's going to happen in these states with abortion referendums?
So-
Is that going to break what you're talking about?
I think it's...
'Cause there's so much attention. Like
Right.
I'm sure you've seen it, Julie Louis-Dreyfus has this huge campaign to hit the states. So it's no longer about the parties mobilizing people in the state. These states are being watched.
Yeah.
And is that going to change that?
So I
pattern?
think that the abortion ballot initiatives will, most of them will pass. Some of them will pass fairly easily. Florida's a little harder because it's a 60% threshold instead of a 50, but it still has a pretty good chance of passing even there. I think Democrats are happy to have this on the ballot this year in the states where it is on the ballot. Of course, it's not going to matter much in like North Dakota or whatever because Democrats have no chance of winning North Dakota on the presidential level. But I think the abortion measure could pass. So I think they're happy to have it, and they're glad not to have the opposite case, like a conservative thing on the ballot that is very popular. There is not a lot of documented records of down ballot things affecting the top of the ballot. However, this is a very close election presidentially, so the margins are going to be small in some of these states, and so maybe that kind of energy could change things. If so, it would be a relatively unusual circumstance, but it could happen. We'll have to see. Not only the ballot measures for abortion, but also I was in Wisconsin a few weeks ago, and there the state Supreme Court had been solidly Republican, and they had drawn some very favorable lines for the GOP for the last 2 cycles, I think. And there was a vote for a state Supreme Court vacancy in early 2023, if I recall, or is it early 2024? It's one of the two. And the Democratic backed, officially nonpartisan, but Democratic backed candidate won, and it flipped from 4-3 Republican leaning to 4-3 Democratic leaning. And one of the things they did was they heard a lawsuit, and they decided to redraw the state legislative lines, not the congressional lines, I don't think yet, but the state legislative lines. And so what people, especially grassroots Democrats, were saying this is that change in the map has meant that in some of the redder areas, or the red-leaning areas, or the more purple areas, where the maps were drawn in such a way that like Democrats had no chance, that suddenly, for the first time in 20 years, people are actually excited to vote for their state legislature seats, and they felt that would be a good factor, sort of pushing turnout, because you suddenly have contested state legislative elections, and maybe that could help Democrats at the top of the ticket as well. It's totally untested, theory. I have no idea if that's the case, but it's an interesting sort of scenario that we'll see if that happens this year or not. My favorite quote from the state Democratic Party chairman there, he said, in Wisconsin, the state very evenly divided, a lot of even results, very, very close results in a lot of elections historically, at least in recent history. He says, I care less, or I pay less attention to the margin of error in polls. What I care about is the margin of effort. These contests are so close that a little bit of change in the energy of one side or the other, getting the turnout, door knocking, just talking to your neighbors, getting people excited to go vote, that is what wins elections in a closely contested state like that. And I think there's a lot to be said for that also being relevant in terms of the 2024 national election.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
I had a
quick
quick one. And I do appreciate the purple shirt, by the way.
That was kind of by design.
I wonder if you've noticed a movement following Utah, trifecta state, which was had a legislature comfortably Republican for a long time, governor comfortably Republican for a long time, and senators, the whole thing. But they were a little bit annoyed at ballot initiatives, so they took to amending the Constitution to disallow or to allow the legislature to override ballot initiative aspect. Is that something that you can see trifecta states doing more of in the future?
They already have been doing that, not necessarily in that specific way, but in recent elections, there have been a lot of ballot measures about ballot measures, and most of those have been to make them like harder to get on the ballot, or give the opposition or give the opposition a better opportunity to knock things off the ballot if they do qualify. It's happened in recent elections, and I don't have the number on top of my head, but I've got a piece coming out soon that does run down all the different ballot measures across the country, and there's a whole section I have on states that are doing that. So yes, if you're and this is mostly Republican states, just because a lot of the states that have citizen ballot measures tend to be more red. It's not 100%, but it's I think a disproportionate number. Whereas a lot of sort of blue states in the East don't have this. It's more of a Western thing historically. So it's more the Republicans who have complete control of the legislature and the governorship don't want to let Democrats sort of ride a popular issue and at least pass something on that issue. It doesn't mean they'll become suddenly a majority party in that state, but at least getting some of the policy some of the policy agenda items into law, like a perfect example is abortion. So they don't want that to happen. And the only abortion ballot measure that was going to be on the ballot this year but got knocked off was in Arkansas, solidly Republican state, probably one of the states where it might have been voted down anyway because it's so conservative. But the state Supreme Court used, apparently, I'm not a total expert of this, but just from what I've read, the state Supreme Court used a pretty blunt sort of instrument to get the ballot measure off the ballot for this year. Now, I guess they'll probably try again in 2 years or whatever, but yeah, you definitely see that a lot. It's just a fight for power.
Well, interestingly, given the Supreme Court in Arkansas, the state Supreme Court, Utah State Supreme Court just allowed or disallowed the legislature to leave the ballot measure on the ballot the way it was written in a very unclear way. They said it was written to be so unclear and confusing to not actually be something worth voting on anymore. So they got it stricken from the ballot.
Yeah. No, that's also I think in Ohio there's a redistricting ballot measure that went to the courts, and the Republicans there who were opposed to the ballot measure rewrote it in a way that's kind of misleading, and I think the court let that stand. There, it's a partisan court, and the GOP has a majority of seats on the court. And so they backed that. Yeah.
So, you didn't exactly speak on this today, but on fact-checking, bring that into the conversation. How much do you think fact-checking contributes to the competitiveness of these newly defined battleground states? And also, in the age of social media, could you just speak in general about how much echo chambers and misinformation contribute to the lack of competitiveness we're seeing in general?
Interesting. So, as much as I love my job at PolitiFact, I don't delude myself into thinking that our work is necessarily moving mountains on this front. We always like to sort of provide our service to people who are open-minded and who want to know, facts. And there are a lot of people who aren't open-minded and don't want to know facts. And I always like to think that there's a kind of silent majority who does, appreciate what we do. But I'm not going to delude myself into thinking that they're most people. So, I think that we are very helpful and provide a great service for people who are open-minded and are following politics and want to be learning what the truth is. Not sure it's necessarily changing their voting behavior or their thinking about how they kind of see politics, but we want to provide a service so that people who want to know the answer can get the answer. Sorry, is that the second question?
Considering social media, how much do echo chambers and misinformation contribute to the lack of competitiveness we're seeing in general? And has it exacerbated it?
I don't know the answer. It probably is not helpful. I don't know if you can draw a direct line, but I think it may, on the margins have, it may boost the phenomenon I was talking about before, where you have a safe district and the sitting member has to worry about their primary and not so much about the general election. In that case, it is easier for a challenger further to the right or further to the left, depending on whether it's a blue or a red seat, to harness social media in factually dubious ways or very antagonistic ways, and can kind of rile up the core base of supporters in that district. So it could have an impact on the margins there. Sure.
Okay, maybe we got time for one more question, maybe I'll ask it.
I'm sorry, do you want one?
Oh, it's one over here?
No. Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'll ask it, because
Yeah.
it's nothing you've talked about, but I know you're gonna be busy tonight.
Yes.
So, because you're gonna be fact-checking the vice presidential debate.
Yep.
So what are you looking for in that debate?
So we at PolitiFact have kind of gotten this down to a science now. It's taken us a while to sort of set up a system that is useful for people. The way we do it is we spend time before the debate, like days before the debate, putting together mini fact checks, three paragraphs of things that that the debaters have said in the past, or their ticket mates have said, and that we think they're likely to say again. So we have all of those for the Trump versus Kamala Harris debate. A few weeks ago, we had 130 pages, I think, of this prepared material. Because our staff is like 20 people. I think we have some outsiders come in. So it's about 23 people, I think, we had on duty for the presidential debate, and we'll have a similar number tonight. And we split it up between people who are doing a live blog and people, and there's some crossover, but and then people who are focusing on the post-debate wrap-up story. We've been doing an increasing number of live blogs. We've done about a half dozen of them for the debates, but also for like other events. We did a live blog for both of the appearances of Trump and Harris before the NABJ, the National Association of Black Journalists, where they had a Q&A. We live blogged those, and there are a couple other town halls and things that we live blogged. And basically, people come to our site, they find the live blog, and then it's not literally in real time, but it's as close as we can possibly get. We take those feeds that we pre-written, quickly edited to make sure that like what they said was the same exact thing that they said previously, and we have to sort of tweak it a little bit, and then that gets put in the live blog within a 2 to 4 minutes of when they say it. So it's not in real time, but it's about as close as we can reasonably get. So we're going to be doing that a lot tonight, and then that live blog becomes kind of the basis for our story that we publish after the debate's over that night. So we're trying to provide people two different options, like something for people who are watching it, and then on the second screen they have us to see what's fact checked, and then people who just like want to see the debate, after it's over, either that night or that morning, they want to get the like full rundown. So we do, and then we're also separately, I should say, we're also doing social media. So we've also pre-written tweets, X posts, and so we send those out quickly after we just check to make sure that the fact check remains the same as what it was before. So we I provide those three. Actually, you could even say four different ways, because we also do TV and radio hits after the debate's over. I'm doing one for WMUR TV. That's in Manchester, New Hampshire. They're a partner of ours, and I think that's the only one I'm doing on debate night. But actually, prior to our debate coverage, I'm also doing a quick hit on the Wisconsin Spectrum station, because Trump is going to be doing a town hall or some sort of rally or event in the state of Wisconsin, so they're going to be showing that live, and they'll then cut into me to talk about some of the things he said that Trump got wrong. So we've got the sort of live blog, we've got the story for afterwards, we've got social media in almost real time, and we've got TV hits and radio hits. So we try to provide, meeting people where they are in terms of the media ecosystem.
Can you predict what's going to be the biggest lie on each side?
No, but I mean, who would have guessed that pets in Springfield in the last debate? I mean, we had fact checked that. We had published, I think, a fact check either that day or the day before, because we had seen that bubbling up as a talking point. But never in a million years would I thought Trump would go there and make that the centerpiece of his argument. So I am not in the business of predicting things like that, because I would always be wrong.
Okay, well, on that note, I think our time is up. Join me in thanking